welcome to another episode of the Nick Files. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a very interesting and probably one of the most disturbing cases I've ever learned or have ever studied in the paranormal field. It's also one of the most unusual and certainly one of the most controversial cases as well. It's something that, a lot of us, some of you guys probably have heard of this story before, but a lot of others haven't. And the story for this, it's truly quite terrifying, in which this case, we're going to be focusing on what eventually became known as the Doris Bither case, or better known as the entity haunting. In other words, if any of you guys have seen the movie The Entity, put it this way, we'll be focusing on the shocking true story behind the movie The Entity. Just before we get started, I just want to give a couple shout outs because I'm already seeing a few comments already starting to appear. Joanne, good to see you. Woman, LOL. Pickle Tom, what's up? What's going on with you? Just before I get started with tonight's show, I do want to warn some viewers out there that while there's nothing particularly graphic I'll be showing, in fact, this slideshow, unlike most of the others, probably has the least amount of photographs, despite how documented this whole case is. So very few photographs will be featured in this. But with that being said, however, although there's going to be nothing visually graphic, this presentation will contain some graphic sexual content, if you will. Normally I don't approach that direction, but this is one of the this is like one of the most incredible paranormal cases that anyone could ever come across. So, but like I said, it will contain some information that is partially sexual and may be disturbing to some more listeners, if you will. So, listener discretion is advised. Pickle Nick. What's going on? Jeremy, you joined just in time. All right, then. So, oh, shut up, Tom. Don't even get me started. All right, then. So, without further ado, let me get the slideshow up. And, of course, as usual, I always have this issue. So, bear with me for just a moment so you guys can see it. Just laughing still what Tom just said. Shut up, Nick. That wasn't nice of you to say. Okay, so hopefully this works. And like I always say, at the beginning of these slideshows, I do apologize if I don't read comments because I'm unable to see I'm unable to see them while I'm doing this. So I'm going to have to kind of rely on my phone so that way I can respond to at least a couple of them. Brad, I could see you there on the phone. Oh, thanks, Brad. I really appreciate that. Thank you. What's going on, Natalie? Good to see you as well. So, yeah, you guys just joined in just in time. And actually, there is someone that really does want to check this out. So give me a second because she actually wants to see this, so bear with me for just a moment. Okay, here we go. All right, so as I said, for today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the shocking true story of behind the movie, The Entity. Certainly one of the most incredible paranormal films to ever be made, but also a movie that's quite disturbing in its own nature, unlike most paranormal films. But if the movie itself, if any of you guys have seen the movie itself, and I'm sure if it's all the more frightening to you, then as like with most cases, the real story behind it is much more darker and much more frightening. So that's why I needed to give a warning just before we got started, because again, this may sound a little graphic. This may sound somewhat graphic, so you guys be ready. It's okay. The roaches, no, they are welcome. No roaches today, Brad. All right, so getting started with this. So, like I said before, there's not very many photographs I'll be presenting because there's very few photographs revolving around this case. Even for certain individuals, I was unable to find at least photographs of them when they were younger. So, and normally I like to keep the historical aspect of it. So, because I couldn't find certain photographs, it's just going to be mostly worded slideshows, if you will. So, this will have to do. But, anyways, we'll get started. So, in the summer of 1974, Dr. Barry Taft, a now renowned parapsychologist and biomedical engineer, was working as a research associate in UCLA's parapsychology laboratory ran by Thelma Moss. He and an associate, Carrie Gaynor, were overheard discussing the paranormal at a lecture in a local bookstore near the UCLA campus by a woman, and she approached the two men with a story about her house being haunted, in which Gaynor told her that he would discuss this with his associate. She didn't give them many details, but invited them to visit the home for themselves, a small house located in Culver City, West Los Angeles, California. Taft and Gaynor initially disbelieved her, citing the commonly occurring phenomena of sleep paralysis or mental illness as her diagnosis. Believing that this would be an open and shut case, little did they know this would be one of the biggest and most terrifying cases in the annals of paranormal history. So I'll put it this way, guys. I mean, what we're going to be discussing about truly is a new dimension in terror. The woman's name was Doris Bither, and it wasn't until after Taft and Gaynor arrived at the house that they got the full story from Doris about the nature of these paranormal occurrences. Doris McGowan, the McGowan is her maiden name, had moved to California from the Midwest with her family at about the age of 10. And although little is known about her early years, her life was falling apart by the time she spoke with the investigators. From what is known, some reports say she grew up as a child of an upper middle class family. As stable as that sounds, Doris' parents ran a turbulent household. Both were alcoholics and were not suited to provide a well-rounded upbringing for a child. As a result, suffered from child abuse from her parents. As a result, she suffered from childhood abuse from her parents following a series of altercations. Both her parents, as well as her aunt and uncle, had decided to disown Doris after a major altercation in her teens and was cut off from having contact with any of her family. Just before I continue, guys, hang on 1 second. My phone is actually just about to die. And if, if you guys want me to respond back in a way, I got to charge this up. I was all over the place today. So give me just 1 second. All right, there we go. All right. So, anyways, unfortunately, things went from bad to worse following Doris's family. As her parents died off, her aunt and uncle also, it was apparent that the abhorrent feeling that they had towards her was so great when she learned that all the inheritance was given to her brother. With no money and being a single mother, Doris set out to make a life of her own. It seems that Doris had a very turbulent upbringing throughout her teenage years, as partially suggested from the last slide. And it has been suggested she started dabbling with Ouija boards, seances, and toying with, there's a mistype there, I'll have to fix that, toying with dark magic at that impressionable age. It is thought she claimed to have experienced some form of supernatural phenomena before moving to the Culver City home. What actually transpired in that notorious house is still the source of mystery and debate. Without speaking directly to Bither, there is no way to know for sure what happened in her childhood that would attract spirits toward her. But the one thing that is certain is that she led an incredibly tumultuous, and tortured life. A petite single mother in her mid-30s, she had 4 children, 1 daughter and 3 sons from 4 different fathers. Her daughter was 6 years old, and her sons were 10, 13, and 16, respectively. She herself was an alcoholic and suffered from serious emotional problems and health issues that had required her to take some type of medication. It was deemed that due to trauma and other mental issues that may have stemmed from a difficult childhood, the medication that was prescribed to Bither may have been used to treat her. Throughout her life, Bither also had a history of physical and substance abuse in the past, as well as having a number of failed marriages and several abusive relationships with men. The Bither family grew up poor and under stressful environments. The space in the house was small, but the Bithers made the best use of what they had. Other than that, her age, family, partners, or even her children's names are a mystery. Her sons report the family had always experienced some minor level of psychokinetic activity even before moving to Culver City. Now, shortly after moving into the 11547 Braddock Drive in Culver City, Doris heard a knock. She opened the door to find an old Hispanic lady in her 70s or 80s who warned Doris that her house was an evil dwelling. You need to get out. I used to live here in this old house, back when it was just a farm, and I was a little girl. There is something very evil here. This place is haunted, and you need to get out, apparently from what she said. The lady turned and left without further explanation, never to return. Following this incident, Doris experienced a series of violent physical attacks from an invisible force. Considering all factors involved, Dr. Taft received her phone number and decided to visit her home to assess the situation. Give me 1 second here, guys. I'm having oh, wait a minute. Okay. I don't know what's going on, but having some technical difficulties here, trying to reach out to the feed. Okay. Now, this is the actual. Now, again, I know I said there was only a few photographs within this slideshow. This is the actual photo of, well, this is a photo of the actual house where pretty much a lot of the rather violent activity took place in. And, looks harmless enough, but according to Doris Bither, while they were living there, it was truly a much different story for her and her family, especially her. So on August 22nd, Dr. Barry Taft and Carrie Gaynor arrived at the Bither home to set up a preliminary interview with Doris and conducted research on what might be happening. From outside, the small Culver City house appeared normal. The inside of the home was far more different. On entering, Dr. Taft was greeted by a totally chaotic situation. The small Culver City home had the living room and kitchen in the front part of the property, while the bedrooms were in a different section in the back of the house. It was best described the layout as an L-shaped property. What is not known is that as small as the house was, a dark 100-year-old home with a 2-level cellar, the bedrooms were in addition to the original house. And ironically, the house already had a reputation for being haunted. The house at the time, ironically enough, was, as you can imagine, was in shambles and severe disrepair, which Doris's family were living illegally. The home reeked of rotten garbage. Dirty dishes were piled high in the sink. Observing extreme disorder in household conditions, the house was filthy in every way. The children were left to fend for themselves, as it was obvious that Doris could not perform her role as a mother. What's going on, Jill? Good to see you. Now, the investigators also noticed squalid living conditions, and there was a poor, tumultuous relationship between the mother and her 4 children. And there was a poor, tumultuous relationship between the mother and her 4 children, is what the investigative team observed upon their first visit. According to Taft, the house was twice condemned by the city. There was obvious tension between the 3 young boys and the mother. The psychodynamics of the home were extremely negative. It seems that the boys, especially the eldest, would harbor some dark and resentful feelings towards their mother. The unconscious mind that is troubled by a physically or verbally abusive environment and negative upbringing is like a lightning rod to the paranormal activities, either attracting poltergeist activity or psychomatically creating it. Excuse me. Now, while Taft and Gaynor performed the first investigation of the home, they noticed that the lights flickered on and off occasionally, as well as reported a feeling of overpressure in their ears while being inside the home, but didn't expect what happened next. While being interviewed, Doris had recalled hearing the spirits banging on walls, lights flickering, and even moving around the house, despite the home being occupied by her children. During the first interview, conducted with Doris's teenage son in the kitchen, the cabinets were reportedly flung open, pots and pans fell violently without anyone touching them, and everyone became suddenly aware of some kind of presence in the bedroom. To make matters a lot more hair-raising, no tremors or earthquakes were said to be reported at the time. Considering that Doris had asked for help, what puzzled Dr. Taft the most was that Doris was being very uncooperative and evasive when answering questions about her life and backstory during a 2-hour interview. She would not tell them her age or give them any medical background. Without her help, the investigation could not continue. This is also one of the most unusual cases. Another reason why this one's so unusual, to be honest, is Doris Bither, unlike most people who've had issues in their homes, and some of these investigations that have taken place on at private residences, Doris Bither to me is almost a mysterious character. She's just, there was just not very much about her, as I already had demonstrated, but there's just not very much information about her, or who she was before then or afterwards, unlike a lot of people who have kind of made themselves well known regarding wherever they lived. And of course, in this day and age, we see a lot of them appear on television shows, different paranormal films, documentaries, whatnot. And even back in the 70s, they had that. Not as frequent as today, of course, but they had those as well. But it's just really unusual. Doris Bither, in my opinion, just seems to stand out from other cases. But again, we'll get to more of the extreme stuff in just a little bit, and you'll see why, more importantly, even the case itself with what happened in this house stands out from other cases. Oh, whoops, I forgot. Now, their initial reaction to Bither's claims was to refer her to a psychiatrist at the Neuropsychiatric Institute. However, a few weeks later, Bither contacted them again and asked that they return because others were now witnessing paranormal phenomena, including strange lights and smells, and would see things out of the corner of their eyes in her home, and it disturbed them. Surprisingly, Taft and Gaynor agreed to return, and this was the beginning of their true investigation, if you will. Damn it, I keep forgetting I'm pressing the wrong button. Anyway. Okay, never mind. Now, it was a hot August day when Taft and Gaynor returned to the house on Braddock Drive to begin their investigation. They immediately noticed two strange things. The house smelled of rotting flesh, in which they were never able to find the source. And the bedroom was ice cold, even though the rest of the house was stifling. The smell would come and go with the coldness. And even more stranger, The house didn't have any air conditioning. Now, they were at one point they were interviewing Doris in the kitchen with one of her friends when a lower cupboard door opened in a frying pan. Wait a minute. Isn't that what they were? Wait a minute. Hang on one second. Isn't that what they were saying on the last one? Um, okay, maybe okay. I thought it was something. I thought it was the same thing. I guess it's just a similar experience. Um, So they were interviewing Doris in the kitchen with one of her friends when a lower cupboard door opened and a frying pan flew out and landed on the floor. They checked the kitchen for wires and other reasons that it may have occurred, but could find none. Typical poltergeist behavior commenced with objects being thrown randomly around the house, with the main events occurring in Doris's bedroom. Lime green plasma lights would shoot across the room. They blocked out and to try in some way to kind of debunk it, if you will, they blocked out all the light in the room to ensure that it was not coming from the outside. But they were then unable to see where the lights were manifesting. So they had to put black poster boards up all over the room with a number and a magnetic orientation reference grid so they could see where they were manifesting and going to. Now, as usual in most cases, nothing happened while they were there. But then they get a call at 1 in the morning, a few days later, from Doris, who was hysterical. Some of the boards had ripped off the walls. It had pulled the plaster and paper with it and had nearly hit her. They arrived at the house not long after once again and tried to reconstruct the incident. The orbs were ripping around the room, and they had asked the entity to tear something off the wall. They hear this ripping noise, and one of the boards goes flying off the wall and hits Doris on her head. They surprisingly they asked it to do it again, and once again one of the other boards rips off and this time lands at her feet. Even more surprisingly, in a room full of people, it seemed, however, that despite that there was a whole group, it seemed to have targeted Doris the most. Additionally, an electric fuse box ripped itself off the wall and flew toward her, which nearly hit her on the head as well. And a candelabra had nearly hit her too. So this is like, in my opinion, even if this was just simple poltergeist phenomena, this is without a shadow of a doubt some of the most violent activity that I've ever researched. But I really wish it would stop there, but things eventually take a much more nightmarish turn. I did notice that I got to fix, there's another mistype on the bottom, so I'll make sure to fix that later. But yeah, things are about to get a hell of a lot worse. Over the next several months, the investigators attempted to document the claims of Doris and her family. It was believed that there were 4 manifestations in the home that were responsible for an array of paranormal phenomena. Doris and Taft claimed that 3 of the ghosts were Asian men. The children also saw these beings. One of them, which was seen on a regular basis by all the family members, appeared as an old man and seemed to have been harmless. The ghost of the old man was seen so often that the children, who by then got so used to seeing the ghost, named him Mr. Who's It. The family believed, at least during that period, that Mr. Who's It was the spirit of the children's recently deceased grandfather. Dr. Taft noted that their depictions were remarkably accurate, not just matching each other's, but also in details commonly attributed to entities from his other cases. Had all the apparitions in the Bither home been so friendly, life would have been much easier, but they were not, unfortunately. Just checking back on comments just before I continue to see if there are any questions or anything that's been said so far. Bear with me. We're clear on the personal profile now on the Things Network page itself. Okay. I know Newland said so. Keep going. Good. Now, it is believed, however, like I said, unfortunately, these spirits were. It is believed, however, that these four male spirits were all malevolent. The spirit that the kids referred as Mister Who's It was probably not their grandfather. Most likely, it was an evil spirit trying to play on on the feelings of a non-responsive child. Now, while phenomena observed in the home included many instances of the type activity commonly reported in haunting cases, the Bither home seemed to have reached a state of infestation as the activity was nearly unrelenting. Three of now we already talked about one of the entities, Mr. Who's It, right? Three of the nameless shapeless entities would terrorize Doris and her family, producing banging on the walls, strange loud voices, mysterious lights, strange sounds and smells, and objects levitating and thrown about by unseen forces. In later interviews, the children described seeing the entities, and said they appeared in the form of a light gray fog that could swiftly move from room to room. However, the most disturbing aspect of the Doris Bither case, however, was not the usual poltergeist activity, as it soon became clear to everyone that there was something truly evil in that house, and it or they were physically attacking the family. Oh my God, just by reading that, and even just by reading that actually just gave me chills, because again, we're not too far from the most intense part of the slideshow. So guys, just be ready for this. um just want to check comments one more time before we continue. Oh, doing computer work, but still okay. That's fine, Jeremy. Joanne, I've never seen that when I watched the movie. There are a lot of differences from what I've heard, Joanne, compared to the movie in real life, but um, there are some similarities to it, but there are a couple differences, definitely. All right, so be ready for this, guys. The three spirits were aggressive towards all the family members, as they would physically strike Doris repeatedly and her children at different times throughout the years. One of them was slapped by one of the entities. Another, as well as Doris herself, bumped into the ghosts, one of them being an invisible man in a hallway. The other children were reported to have been bitten, scratched, and also slapped by what they believed was the fourth entity. When interviewing the children, they reveal that certain rock songs would incite the entity. One song in particular on the Uriah Heep album, Demons and Wizards, that talks about good versus evil, and good winning would cause the haunting to intensify. The eldest son found a way to make the ghosts particularly excited. Dr. Tav reported that Bither's eldest son alleges that whenever he listened to certain music such as Black Sabbath or Uriah Heep, that there would be an increase in paranormal activity around the home. The songs that mention or were about devil worshiping is what seemed to upset the entities. Dr. Tav reported that the eldest son would go on to say that the activities intensified, like I said, whenever he played certain music. He claims that music would set off a chain reaction of orbs appearing around the house, and the house lights would turn on and off. Okay. So, as a result, they decided to test this out. And on one occasion, a large apparition of a man from the lower waist up manifested in front of them. It was made up of these lights, not illuminated by them. They could see the upper torso, the shoulders, the brow ridge, the brow ridge of his head. It was detailed. I mean, as detailed, and it was articulating, moving its arms, and then it disappeared as soon as it had appeared. The image was in the same lime green light that they had seen in the room. They had 9 professional photographers taking lots of photos, in color, regular sensitive with all types of film, but did not capture a single image. They all wrote down what they saw, and everyone had written down the same thing. Even more amazingly, there were at least 25 to 28 people in the room, which had all seen the same thing. If only a couple had seen it, then it would have been discounted as a hallucination, but not with all of them seeing it. Hang on, I see we got a comment here from Jill. Does it upset them or instigate them instead? Because I would think it just raises their energy, but not in the sense that they don't like it. They love it. In the case with this whole thing that was going on, Jill, it's kind of hard to say. Um, they never, they couldn't really tell if whatever was in this home either enjoyed it or hated it. Regardless of the case, it definitely intensified the activity with Doris's eldest son. All right, so okay, I guess I was a page early. Now this is where things are going to might get a little bit disturbing here, guys. So be ready. Doris, however, was the one who seemed to be the target of the most violent assaults. Now, while the children were pushed and on occasion thrown in perhaps the most frightening account, it was Doris that she was reportedly violently attacked, beaten, bitten, and savagely raped repeatedly. She claimed that one of the entities, the largest and tallest one, which she referred to as the entity, was sexually assaulting her. The claim of rape by these beings is one of the most interesting aspects of the case. Doris said that the 2 smaller beings that accompanied it would help hold her down while the entity would rape her. Unable to scream and paralyzed by complete terror and fear, Doris had no idea what was happening to her. As hard to believe as her claim may have been, there were witnesses to the attacks. The attacks against Bither were particularly brutal, and they went on for years on almost a nightly basis. In one instance, Doris's son attempted to intervene when he heard screaming and saw his mother tossed around the room by an invisible phenomenon in which he himself was tossed across the room by the unseen force, breaking his arm. While no one saw the entity, her sons and other witnesses did see Doris attacked by an invisible force that punched and slapped her and threw her against a wall as if phantom hands were grabbing her. Of course, Taff and Gaynor were skeptical of all this. Ghost apparitions are a hard thing to prove and collect evidence for. Ghostly rape is even harder to believe. Oops, went a little bit too far. Dr. Tapp and his associates originally had serious reservations about her claims, as the alleged violence preceded their involvement in the case, and Tapp believed such incidents did not occur. However, Doris also displayed injuries common to rape victims, such as major scarring on her legs and thighs, as if someone had grabbed her. It was not until they saw the bruises in her inner thighs and all over her body, as well as people outside the family corroborating by testifying that they had also seen apparitions, that both investigators started to take heed as to what Doris was saying. To both investigators, this must have been the most bizarre claim to date. How can you prove spectral rape or even claim it? It would seem that a person would have to be insane. It would seem that a person would have to be insane to even admit this. Jill, yeah, you know what? It could very well be a case of, even though that Doris and some of the children actually did see some of these entities by certain features, although they took human forms. it definitely does show the behavior of an incubus. Over the next few months, during the course of their visits, the researchers claimed to witness spectacles unnatural, bright greenish yellow balls of light. They called corpuscu- uh, corpuscular balls of light flying around the bedroom. And while they were successful at capturing photos of some light anomalies, there were many attempts that failed. Objects falling from shelves by themselves, bad odors, cold zones, and poltergeist activity in the house. Damn it, I keep doing something that keeps going a little bit fast. Okay, and then like I said earlier, I guess this was not necessary, but I'll read it anyway. Dr. Taft had the eldest, as I mentioned before, play the songs in question, in which he did observe that the lights and orbs did increase. I do apologize if some of the information is repeating itself because right before I got on, I was actually spending the next 2 hours putting this whole thing together. So um, it was kind of done in a rush state as soon as I came home from work. So I do apologize if some of the info is partially repeating itself. Jill, let's see. They can shapeshift. They can shapeshift though. Yep, that's definitely possible. But like I said, from what we basically know from now is like I said earlier, Jill. Apparently, and I wasn't sure if you were here when they were describing this, but Doctor Taft, I mean Doris and Taft claimed that the ghosts were of Asian men. So they apparently had a human-like appearance to them, but if it could still very be much some type of incubus that may just have, or three of them in this case, that may have the ability to shapeshift. Now, during the investigation, Doris claims she witnessed poster boards. Oh wait, it's the same stuff again. Um, okay, yeah. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Some of the same information pops up, which I'll make sure to cut down later. Claims she witnessed poster boards the researchers had put up with duct tape for the purpose of investigation being torn off the wall by unseen hands. Kitchen cupboard slammed open. A skillet flew out of the cupboard as if thrown. They were joined in. They were joined in their visits by an acquaintance of Bithers who said she could communicate with spirits, as well as a large number of people related to the laboratory, or to Taft and Gaynor in one way or another. But Taft and Gaynor, in addition to Bither herself, are the only ones who offered a description of unusual occurrences. The investigators noticed the activity was always at its most intense when Doris was in the house. Dr. Taft also observed that Doris was a heavy drinker. However, when she stopped drinking, the phenomenon also stopped. The researchers indicated that these occurrences decreased over the course of the visits. As the investigation continued, Dr. Taft organized a group of paranormal investigators, as well as professional photographers and camera operators with high speed cameras and audio recording equipment, to go to the Bither home and attempted to document the case and capture something on tape. They eventually called in Frank D. Felicia, I think that's how you say his last name. I do apologize if I'm saying it wrong, who arrived with a filmmaker friend to try and capture the phenomenon on film. A few times they were able to photograph the orbs. Once again, seems like some of the info is repeating again. But this time, however, I actually do have one of the photographs as shown here. Although, like I said, many attempts at photography were unsuccessful. The research team also brought in Geiger counters to measure radiation. When no activity was happening, the counters showed normal levels of background radiation. However, during times when the activity was occurring, there wasn't even any measurable background radiation that registered. Let me see what Jill here says. Like the female version can be a very seductive, even alluring, beautiful appearance, so she can violate the man sexually after he is entranced. Yeah, That's very true, Jill. I don't know. It's hard to say, but it like you said, it could very well be a succubus, excuse me, an incubus, um, taking the appearance of taking appearances of men, apparently. Okay. Now, in perhaps the most famous report, the group of around 30 investigators assembled in Doris Bither's small bedroom, set up cameras, and waited to record the events. After a period of time had passed and nothing appeared to be happening, and anxious to see any paranormal activities, Dr. Taft suggested that Doris yell and conjure the unseen entities to try to provoke them to act. According to a later report, Doris went into a frenzy and began to swear, yell, and taunt the spirits while the investigators watched with recording materials alongside them to document the event. As all looked on, and to much surprise, allegedly lights had suddenly begun to turn on. Light orbs began to manifest in the room. As Doris kept provoking the beings, a green mist snaked out from a corner of the room. As if it was coiling, the green mist started swirling, growing, and began to take form. Within seconds, a figure could be seen in the mist, becoming more dense as time passed. It was described as being a large human upper torso, very muscular, without any other features, such as arm. Yeah, it was described as being a large human upper torso, very muscular, without any other features such as arms or legs, which was what they reported seeing, but moved as a human would move. The torso of the being did not show facial features. From what they gathered, this was a male entity. One investigator soon fainted after seeing the incredible phenomenon. Perhaps it's not surprising that no matter how many high-speed cameras were set up to capture this, that the team even had professional cameras present or after when the film from the numerous cameras was developed and examined, the investigators were dismayed to find that none of this had ever been captured on film. And there was little to see, as is often, unfortunately, the case with paranormal activity. Now, there are very few Polaroid photographs taken by the investigators that are available, such as this image as you see here, when Bither indicated to them that the entity was directly in front of her face. The images were taken by both Taft and Gaynor with an instant film Polaroid SX70 camera and a 35 millimeter camera. Taft and Gaynor brought an infrared camera, but accidentally overexposed the film, rendering it unusable. Additionally, the numerous photographs taken with the Polaroid camera refused to develop properly, instead only producing white orbs, a static circular band of light, an irregular bright line, and shapeless overexposed areas appearing in many of the photos. Sheets of white fuzz also appeared in some of the photos as well. The Polaroids show her body, but an orb of light masks her features, all of which were the only objective evidence gathered in the course of their visits. Now, ironic, get this. I was fortunate enough to find this, and I just dropped my phone. There we go. Thank you. Hang on. Okay, so now I was fortunate, like I said, I did manage to find this, which I was fortunate enough to find online. But what I'm about to present to you guys is what is allegedly the only known photo of Doris Bither herself, which is this is the photo right here. So obviously the only known photograph of Doris Bither herself was taken right after the previously mentioned pictures, at a time when the entity was supposedly no longer present. Now, obviously, you guys can see it's two different photographs. Yes, it is. It was all taken in the same house, but these were taken in two different areas. So the photos that they're talking about that was taken prior before this photo of Doris Bither. Unfortunately, I tried looking all over the internet to try to find them, and there were like those images within an image where I did manage to find it, but it was not good enough for me to crop it out so I could just make it an image of itself. But fortunately, though, I did manage to find, and this is something I'll be presenting as we near the end of the slideshow. I do actually have rare footage from an old paranormal show that was shot back in the 70s. And while they do focus on a couple investigations, which fortunately both Taft and Gaynor were featured in, although they focus on some of their other cases, they do talk a little bit about the entity case, in which those other photographs are featured. So I'll be able to show that a little bit later. See here. I just want to see what's going on. It looks like plasma or ectoplasm. It could be. And yes, Jeremy. Jenny. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, it is true. Because I'm doing the slideshow, I'm unable to see comments while I'm doing this. So that's actually why I'm checking my phone. So let me just see what you were saying before. So as usual, guys, like I said, I do apologize that I don't respond as much because, like I said, I can't see the comments while I'm doing this, unfortunately. Okay. So as they investigated the house, and now we're talking about the photos that were taken prior to this photo of Doris, Doris would tell him where the entity was, and Carrie Gaynor would take a Polaroid photo. In all the pictures where Doris said the ghost in all the pictures where Doris said the ghost was, the image was bleached out. He decided to do a control picture when she said it had gone, and the Polaroid took a perfect picture. It occurred every time she said the ghost was there. A scratch across this last photo, as you guys can clearly see right in this area, which I actually first thought maybe it was just because it was an old photograph, but upon looking at it, according to what they say here, a scratch across this last photo, presumably caused when it was ejected from the camera, gives it a haunting quality that only adds to the mystery. The fact that Doris's eyes are closed, creates even more distance and detachment between her and the viewer. Now, some of you guys may have seen this photo before, believe it or not. This is actually quite a famous photo. Again, this is the only other image I was able to find involving this investigation. But the most famous, incredible, and only photograph of interest is the one that shows Doris sitting on her bed, investigators surrounding her with a strange floating free arc of light showing and floating over her head in the middle of the picture with her face obscured by her hands. The photographic evidence produced by the team shows that the arc of light could not have been created by the lighting in the room and is actually floating above Doris, not on the wall, even though behind it we see the room's corner. What's incredible and equally unbelievable is that the arc of light appears smooth, even though this is in a room with corners and one would expect bends in the arc as when someone uses a projector to display an image and the image hits corners in a room. Just a very interesting photograph. And you can clearly see, even though it's in black and white, yeah, you can clearly see the corners right here in this room, and the strange arc of light. So if it was from an actual light source or a projector light, it would have been bent right into the corner of the wall. Now, the investigation of the home and Bither's apparent attack had lasted for 10 weeks before a conclusion had been revealed. During that time, surprisingly, no sexual assault occurred. The rapes had occurred long before Dr. Taft had started to investigate. He deduced was not, in his professional opinion, the result of spectral rape, aka what's known as spectrophilia, but a rather disturbingly real poltergeist outbreak. Dr. Taft believes that poltergeist activity is possibly linked to seizures and epilepsy. And I know there's a lot of people who have different opinions on what, poltergeist activity is, because as we all know, poltergeist is the German word meaning noisy ghost. And a lot of people believe that poltergeists are actual entities. And this could very well be one of them. And the fact that that Doris had a very poor upbringing, as well as her children herself, it's usually, and this is what I believe, it's usually energy. And it is energy that is usually negative. So, and we're going to get to this a little bit later in the show, but I definitely believe that some of these kids may have possessed psychic kinetic abilities, as well as Doris herself, meaning that they may have even created a physical embodiment. Excuse me. They may have created a physical embodiment of their own negative energy. Now, this is actually something what Carrie Gaynor had said. The most extraordinary thing we've ever come across. It happened over and over, a plethora of phenomena. At the end of the investigation, the researchers recommended that Doris move because of how bad the situation had become. The owner, hearing about all the supernatural things going, decided to sell the home, and Doris and her kids were immediately removed from the house and forced to move. To the astonishment of the investigators, the bizarre phenomenon disappeared. Soon after, Taft and Gaynor had taken photos of each room once again, taken with the same camera, only to see a major difference in the photos. No white sheets or orbs had appeared in the photos, and it was apparent that the paranormal presence had no longer been in sight, and the same film cassette functioned normally once again. I think we're getting kind of close actually to the end of the end of the slideshow. I better. Oh, geez, it's already 4:30. Oh my goodness. No, wait, no, it's going to be 5:30. 5:30. Jeez. I'm still getting used to this new time, guys. Okay. We still got time. Good, good. Jill said, yes, I pick up a PK in this case. Okay. After several weeks, forgot to fix, it says Dory. It's supposed to be Doris. I'll fix that later. After several weeks, Doris and her children moved into a new house in Carson. Within a few weeks of moving in, poltergeist activity began occurring in the new house, as well as in the houses of both of the family's next door neighbors. They were coming home and finding rubbish on the floor and plates stacked up, in which Doris contacted the investigators once again. They carried on with their investigation, and Taft and Gaynor witnessed additional phenomena in the new home. On one occasion, they had a recorder with them. They turned out the lights and heard a loud crash as a vase appeared to be thrown and smashed to the floor in front of them. Then they recorded the sound of deep breathing and footsteps appeared on audio recordings, then a dragging noise approaching the microphone until the mic shut up on its own, and tape on the wall was pulled off by invisible hands. And then the board it was holding flew off and hit Bither in the head. Okay, I don't know why it's showing some of that again. I'll have to fix. Man, there's a lot of fixer-ups to this. This happened twice within minutes. At no time did they ever hear anyone moving or the breathing. Give me 1 second here, guys. Oh, geez. Got another fly problem down here today, so we'll have to fix that. I'm going to have to take care of that after the show. So, as you could probably very well imagine, as a result, Doris moved once again. So, now, like I said earlier, what's pretty interesting about this case is these events would become the subject of Frank D. Felicia's 1978 novel, The Entity, with a few embellishments here and there, as well as also fictionalizing the events surrounding Doris Bither and her family. In 1982, a film called The Entity, directed by Sidney J. Furie and starring Barbara Hershey, who plays the character patterned after Doris, and Ron Silver, was unleashed on American cinema goers, and this terrifying experience followed a young woman as she was sexually assaulted and tormented by an unseen force. However, many liberties were taken with regards to the portrayal of Dr. Barry Taft's study of the actual entity, going so far as to depict the team capturing the entity. In reality, Dr. Taft and his team did everything they could for Doris Bither and her family, but in the end, the Bither family moved away. With each new move, the entity followed Doris and her family. Dr. Barry Taft served as a consultant both for the book and the movie. In the filming of the movie, the actor playing the son, strangely enough, broke his arm in one scene, and the curtains tore from top to bottom without explanation, which, as far as I know, that was the only type of case. I mean, that was the only type of issue that they had while filming the movie that had an unexplained cause, if you want to consider that paranormal. But it's definitely it eerily mirrors out from what happened in the real case, because one of the kids, as I mentioned earlier, when he was trying to save her mother from the entity, he was thrown across the room and he broke his arm. But surprisingly, according to Taft, the director, Sidney J. Furie, didn't believe the real life story and just thought they were all a bunch of drugged out wackos. Yeah, it's kind of the case. In this case, reality, as we all know, is much more frightening than fiction, because the true story behind the entity is a much more harrowing ordeal than could be ever contained on celluloid. The Entity is one of the few movies based on true events that manages to capture the feeling of desperation that the real life counterparts surely felt. But it still can't come anywhere close to the real horror that Bither was forced to endure until the day she died. According to an interview with Rue Morgue from 2012, Furie went out of his way to keep from learning anything about the actual case, and the film is a very loose adaptation of the actual events. In any case, Martin Scorsese, I guess that's how you say it, apparently loved the film and put it on his list of the 11 scariest movies he's ever seen. Now, surprisingly, I actually haven't seen The Entity. I've been wanting to for, of course, the last couple of years. Of course, now with a lot of movie watching websites and Netflix and on demand and stuff, I'm sure it's available somewhere for me to watch. And I've been told by a lot of people it definitely is a hard to watch film. Truth be told, even with horror movies, and this is something I'm sure Don and I would be talking about on his show, but I think Don would actually agree with me on this. I do not normally like watching movies involving rape and sexual assault, even if it's in the paranormal field. I know that's the case, obviously, for the movie The Entity, but from what I've heard from a lot of people is when those scenes in particularly occur, you're horrified by it, you're shocked by it, you're disturbed by it. But at the same time, though, when it's occurring, you just can't seem to take your eyes away from it, because with all due respect, the spectral rape sequences, if you will, the effects they use, however, are amazing. So it's really hard to watch, but you just can't seem to take your eyes away from that, even when she's being spectrally raped. So, because, like I said earlier, about how she's kind of a mysterious person, it is not known if she ever received any treatment for her alcoholism, or emotional problems, but it does appear that she was helped. Doris Bither eventually disappeared with her family, shying away from the limelight gained by the release of the book and film written about her experiences. Let's see. Jill said, saw it a long time ago, but I could see it again. Jenny, yeah, okay, I saw it as a child. It took me years to watch it again. It's absolutely mind-blowing. They went on a camping trip. It followed them there too, frightened me for life. The effects on those scenes are all, oh yeah, they are absolutely, from what I've heard, Jenny, they are it's awful scenes, but again, it's incredible effects of what they've used. Joanne here says, I watched The Entity to clarify the difference of an entity apparition. And then Jill here says, I know people will watch nearly all paranormal except demonic possession, maybe because it's too realistic along the lines of being more real than all the rest. Yeah, it definitely, honestly, surprising. I'd rather watch exorcism scenes than spectral rape in this case. Wait a minute, hang on a second. I'm having some technical issue here. What's going on here? Hold on one second, guys. I'm having my cordless keyboard doesn't seem to be cooperating with me. Hang on. Let's try this. Okay, you know what? I don't know what's going on with it, but I'll have to worry about it later. I'll just use the keys on the actual keyboard for now. So, as the question is, what happened to Doris Bither after leaving the Braddock Drive residence is a further collection of vague stories and rumors that after Doris left her Culver City home, the phenomenon ceased to exist in the house. Dr. Barry Taff reported that Doris Bither moved away from Culver City to Carson, like I said earlier, from Carson to San Bernardino, by then without telling Taff and Gaynor, though she maintained contact with the paranormal investigators and researchers as well as Frank D. Felicia, but they didn't investigate any of her homes further after Carson, from San Bernardino to Texas, and finally back to San Bernardino. Unfortunately, the attacks did not disappear. While jumping between the two states, the remaining members of the Bither family claimed that after they moved out of the house, the horrible events continued. And Doris reported that no matter where she moved, the phenomenon followed her and her family to every place they moved to. It would appear this is a case of a person being haunted rather than a place, which does make a lot of sense when you think about it. Feeding the notion that the poltergeist phenomenon was a manifestation of her unstable environment and mind, the spectral rape and brutal assaults of Doris continued wherever she went. Again, just want to check on the time here. Okay. At one point, Dr. Tav also reported that her her psychological state is made apparent when Doris claimed she had been impregnated by the entity, which later turned out to not be true. Medical tests showed her not to be pregnant, but suffering from an ectopic or hysterical pregnancy. As time passed, the occurrences subsided, and so apparently did Bither's communication skills. Author Felicia stopped hearing from her in the early 90s, and by all accounts, she and her family had disappeared to an undisclosed location and seemed to vanish from existence. Even Dr. Barry Taff, who allegedly kept in contact with her, was unsure of her whereabouts. She had never come forward regarding her stories around the time of both the release of the book and the film based on her paranormal experiences, although Taft claimed he caught up with her at the premiere for the film, and she told him that it had almost stopped. No one could say for sure what could have been going on or what it was that haunted and tormented the family in that small Culver City house, since Doris Bither has not been heard of since the late 80s or 90s, depending on some reports, but hers is the first documented and recorded case of a paranormal haunting going to such a sexual extreme. However, this is where things get really interesting here, and this was something I was actually amazed to have found. In recent times, some of the children have confirmed everything that happened in the house in Culver City and even added an unexpected twist to the story. And another strange twist of events, in 2009, Javier Ortega, who writes for the website Ghost Theory and was working on an upcoming book about the Bither case, conducted an interview with a man named Brian Harris, who claimed to be Bither's middle son, who was 13 years old in 1974. It seems that Mr. Harris had been posting messages in online forums related to the case and offering his version of events. Mr. Harris wanted to set the record straight about some of the claims made by Dr. Barry Taff about his mother being an abusive alcoholic. The interview with Harris is also vague. According to Brian, that as far as the home being twice condemned by the city, this was not the case, as the home was never condemned. The home was repossessed by the city and then sold. Doris was renting it at the time. It was then bought by the next door neighbor, Mr. Bob Salcedo. I guess that's how you say it. And then sold it when he had heard of what was going on and was frightened. Yeah, the name of the movie is that's what the movie is called, Jeremy. It's called The Entity, yes. And Josh, the one from the early 80s, from 1982. Actually, I just want to point this out really quickly. What's kind of interesting about when The Entity was released, put it this way, some people almost considered it like the R-rated version of what Poltergeist would have been, because ironically enough, both films came out in 1982, although I think The Entity came out first before Poltergeist. But, and ironically enough, they were to be released right around the same time. However, Steven Spielberg and Tobe Hooper, and if I'm saying this correctly, they had to push the release date of Poltergeist to a later time in 1982, because mainly due to the fact that both films, while yes, different stories, they seem to have been just too similar to each other because they both involved paranormal phenomena. Let's see here. Cordless keyboard cordless keyboard malfunctions they don't want us to talk about. It's kind of like when equipment cameras and necessary tools, equipment suddenly are shut off or deemed useless during investigation or researching paranormal sites. I don't know. It's it's definitely strange because usually my cordless keyboard works. So I'm just glad, however, that the laptop is still working. I just hope it doesn't shut off. If there's something here, I don't want to give it any ideas. All right. So, continuing forward with the truth. Brian claims to have witnessed many of the attacks, himself receiving less abuse. He believes that the entities were drawn to the negative and frightened attitude the rest of the family members, especially Doris. It was as if they, the four entities, showed themselves whenever they felt like. He also described the entities as like a fog or like a human, but not quite, like a silhouette, just not clear, translucent and foggy. Harris described Harris described the features of the apparitions, though, when referring to the initial description that Dr. Barry Taff had made about the spirits looking Asian. According to Harris, they did not look Asian. It was like a sculpture, like a chiseled body, not a full figure, but at times we could see some of it, the musculature. It's funny, the whole incident about them being Asian, that's not true. I don't know where they, Taff and Gaynor, got that idea from. They did not have Asian features. They did not look Asian. At times, it would be annoying. We would be watching television, and these things would walk by like nothing. We were so used to the poltergeist that we just got to a point where we wouldn't even care. Jeez. Oh my God, that just freaked me. I'm in the basement here, guys, and the boiler just went on. It just scared the hell out of me. Yikes. So, he also said that because his bedroom was next door to his mother's room, He would have to listen to the assaults as they happened, and in a few cases, he actually saw her being beaten by an invisible force. The whole rape thing was real. My room was right next door to my mother's. I would hear the attacks happening, things being thrown, her screaming. Oh, hang on a second. Let's see what Jeremy just said. Another jump incident involving Nick Mulay. That's funny. Um, so I would hear the attacks happening, things being thrown, her screaming. Then she would come out of the bedroom and have all these bruises on her legs, her inner thighs, just like in the movie. There were times where we would see it happen in front of us. It was like as if a man was standing in front of my mother and would start to beat her. Imagine a woman being beaten. You could see her being picked up and thrown around. Sounds, slaps, but there was no one there to actually do it. He continued. We all felt it too. Pushing, biting, and scratching being done to us. We were all attacked. There were about 4 entities in the home, and they made themselves known by appearing all the time. I think it took a lot of energy for them to do that. Brian Harris confirmed that he had witnessed the bruises on the inside of his mother's thighs and legs and the attacks, and although the film had exaggerated a lot of the incidents, though he thought Barbara Hershey had portrayed his mother well. Um, Says here, although Jill said, although Poltergeist was so tied to so many other worldly things, it became cursed. That would be a great future Nick Files. That whole story connected to Poltergeist. Another interesting case as far as the after effects go. Yeah, and I just said it, Josh. It's Barbara Hershey. Well, Jill, we'll talk about that right at the end of when I end the show. Just be ready. I got something interesting to tell you about that. Did they ever discover the names of these demons residing there or attached to this family? Um, Honestly, I don't think they did. This is pretty much a lot of the information I was able to find from Harris because there's more info on it I'm going to reveal. He also claims that the presence of the paranormal investigators exaggerated the haunting, making his home life a complete hell. When the team would show up, I hated it because I knew as soon as they left, they would become so angry that the house would come alive. It was as if the ghosts were upset that we went and told, like they were throwing a temper tantrum, a hissy fit. So things would start flying. We would get attacked. They were angry at us for telling. Dr. Barry Taft reported only 3 spirits in the home. Harris reported that there were 4 entities in the beginning of the interview, as well as the other children. When asked about the 4th spirit, Harris responded, "That was the one we called Mr. Who's It. He was always walking around the house. He was the one who I believed to be my grandfather, because it told me. It said that it was my grandfather. It looked like him." Harris additionally explained the claims of his older brother listening to satanic music as Dr. Taft reported. "We never listened to satanic music. It was Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep. Any kid that grew up in the 70s and listened to rock, that is what they listened to. It was the cool thing to do. Although we did notice that when we would play certain songs, the spirits would become agitated. There is this song in the Uriah Heep album, Demons and Wizards, that talks about good versus evil, as I mentioned earlier. Every time we would play that, the spirits, would become agitated. After Doris and her kids were forced to move, Harris explained the new place we moved to was The new place we moved to was hell. It was in the bad part of Carson. There was very little paranormal activity happening. It was hell because of the neighborhood. It was a bad neighborhood in school. The paranormal stuff was very rare at that point. Brian Harris and his siblings all possess some form of psychic power, according to him. Although throughout the years it has become more and more faint, he still sees shadows and spirits every now and then. Throughout his life, he's seen them as well as his siblings. It was only in the Culver City home that it became negative and physical. The intensive psychokinetic energy in the Culver City home could have been extremely overwhelming. Combined with the negative attention it brought, unwanted intrusion of the research team, and family tension, it could have easily been a beacon for all these evil spirits. When asked about the ectopic and hysterical pregnancy claims, he responded, "It's possible. My mother moved around a lot. She was so unstable, we would lose contact with her. She had so many boyfriends and husbands that I lost count. So it's a possibility that one of her boyfriends got her pregnant." Harris reported that Doris, ironically, just a few slides previously, as I just brought up, never lived in San Bernardino. After leaving Carson, she left for Texas and then came back to the Lawndale and Torrance cities, a few miles south of Culver City. Now, you guys are all probably wondering, do we know whatever happened with Doris Bither herself, if she's still alive today or not? According to Harris, his mother, Doris Bither, passed away of pulmonary failure in 1995, though there are a few sources that state that she died in 1999 at the age of 58. While it was stated that her death was the result of multiple organ failure, the precise cause of Doris Bither's untimely death was never medically determined. Trying to pin down a reason behind such a violent and horrific assault is impossible. One must assume that whatever type of energy creates a spirit is capable of holding the same disgusting, vile sentiments that rapists have. Putting any logic into this kind of visceral, demeaning assault is tantamount to banging one's head against a wall. Plenty of researchers have formed theories as to why Bither was attacked. Unfortunately, they all place the blame squarely on her shoulders. It's an awful logical leap in a scenario with no logic. Let me just read here because I only have a few minutes left here, guys. Our church would reverse Black Sabbath on record and tell us it was satanic messages, among others, to our church youth group, Protestant. Mom went back and forth from that to Catholic. She was a recluse toward the end. Yeah. One paranormal researcher's theory is that Bither was psychic or had psychic tendencies, and that her negative energy either made made her an easy target for the passing spirits. Another theory is that because powerful men had abused Doris, she may have subconsciously materialized her attackers. There are also theories, like I mentioned earlier, that because she dabbled in the occult as a teen, that she made herself a portal for these evil spirits. The most sound theory is that she was suffering from sleep paralysis, but that doesn't account for how she would have received bruises on her inner thighs, or how her children were also assaulted by invisible entities. There are some supernatural theories outside the underlying theory that Bither was raped by ghosts. The one that makes the most sense is that she may have been the victim of a poltergeist scenario, which is different than a normal haunting. Poltergeists are different from ghosts in that they're non corporeal, incredibly noisy energy beings that manifest in times of overbearing negative energy. By all accounts, Bither was an alcoholic who wasn't receiving any treatment for her addiction. With 4 kids in the house, it's entirely likely that there were a lot of negative emotions floating around. This is the perfect breeding ground for a poltergeist. Bither and her children may have been at their wits' end and managed to create a harmful energy that ran amok throughout the household. See, Jill's saying, wonder if they played a backwards record at some point where some believe it could be a conduit in conjuring the demonic. They could have done this unintentionally. It's very likely, but that I'm not sure of. That's ridiculous. Absolutely no one deserves what happened to. Yeah, definitely. I mean, poor Doris, she really had a difficult life growing up. I mean, you know, the fact that she had a very poor upbringing, she was abused by her parents, her uncle and aunts, and that the inheritance was given to her brother, and that she had several abusive relationships with men. She had trouble having a job, really had trouble, trying to raise her kids. I mean, truthfully, I'm not saying this in a negative way. She should have given her kids up, for adoption just so they had a much better lifestyle. But, obviously, with everything that she was going through, unfortunately, she probably wasn't the brightest person in the world. But, as interesting, as frightening as the case is, as like you just said here, Josh, you truly believe that she was violated by a poltergeist. I actually do feel sorry for her. I mean, you do have to feel sorry for her one way or another. Definitely something that she definitely did not deserve. And Jill, you said it was invited a long time ago during her occultism period in her teen years and never left. Yep, which is quite common in a lot of these cases. Now, it is important to point out a few factors in this case. Doris's addiction to alcohol and her being abusive and geez, I can never say that word. Belligerent almost on a daily basis, as well as her unwillingness to seek help for her abuse and deal properly with it. Because of her refusal to properly deal with her own psychotic issues, it's believed that her energy and the energy in her home manifested itself as poltergeist phenomenon. It should be taken into consideration that the paranormal activities were extremely powerful only when Doris was present in the home. Doris almost always, in a drunken stupor, seemed to be the center of it all. While intoxicated, Doris would attract the phenomenon almost on cue. There were times when she was present with the team and was not under the influence of alcohol that the poltergeist did not manifest itself, which we can only conclude that when Doris's mind was clouded and her inhibitions minimized, her psychokinetic energy took over. Doris Bither and her sons, especially the eldest, could have all been psychic. It is well known that parents sometimes pass down their psychic abilities to their kids. In other words, psychic parents produce psychic kids. If the parent was psychic and the kids were psychic, the tumultuous relationship in the home could have produced a staggering amount of psychokinetic energy, enough energy to physically manifest poltergeist activity. The feelings that Doris's kids could have had against her and her addictions can be represented by the Hephaestus syndrome. I think that's how you say it. Hephaestus, I'm sorry, being the Greek god of fire and metallurgy, was kicked off Mount Olympus by his abusive mother. Hephaestus, I'll just say that, held a very turbulent relationship with his mother. Chaos and love combined in a love-hate relationship. Another theory is that Doris could have attracted 3 evil spirits into her life. It could be argued that Doris Bither could have been abused by 3 influential men in her life. In this case, her father, her uncle, her grandfather, or someone she trusted. The combination of her self-medicating and having psychic abilities, as well as self-loathing, could have made her into an attractive victim to malevolent forces. Her turbulent lifestyle and energy, as well as her kids' energy, could have very well have manifested her feelings into something very evil in a metaphysical level. Post-traumatic stress syndrome and psychic abilities can have a great effect on a person. A person that does not know about their abilities and or is under the influence of a drug can have a great effect on their surrounding environment. Based on Bither's story, his own observations in the photographs, Dr. Barry Taft concluded paranormal phenomena must have been involved, calling the case a haunting. Now, reviewing the case 4 decades later, investigator Benjamin Radford, which the picture was supposed to show up after that, this area, concluded the case likely involves a distressed family poor investigation techniques, and confirmation bias. An analysis of the photographs attributed the result to common photography mistakes, such as a thin object close to the camera or accidental manipulation of the exposure dial. In the case of the 35 millimeter pictures, mishaps in the development process may yield results similar to what is shown. Even if those mistakes are discounted, none of the lighter areas on the photographs are consistent with the trail of a moving light. With a trail of a moving light would leave on photographic material. If UCLA students were earnestly conducting such a serious and exciting investigation, one would expect there to be more evidence and records of their findings. What's going on, Rochelle? Good to see you. I see you're watching from the personal chat. Good to see you. Okay, we do have to speed this up because I am approaching near the end, and the next show will be starting real shortly. Surely such a case would have been heavily documented with not only photographs but recorded interviews as well as video footage. All this technology would have been available during the summer of 1974. With the Doris Bither case, there is no such evidence, but a case frequently labeled the most celebrated in U.S. supernatural history. It is odd that more hard evidence isn't available to support what allegedly happened in the Braddock Drive house. Now, unfortunately, this is going to have to wait till next week. This is not going to be part 2, but I was actually going to show what I did manage to find, fortunately, was a rare interview of Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor in the late 1970s. And like I mentioned earlier, they first discuss a couple of their other cases, but then eventually they go into the entity case. So unfortunately, the clip is a 10-minute clip, and obviously I'm just about out of time. So that will have to wait till next week. So this is the actual, I know it's all black right now, but this is the slide where the video would be presenting. But again, we just don't have enough time. So we'll have to wait till next week. So until then, I'm going to end it here, which is, oh wait, there's one more slide. I do have a picture, however, of Dr. Barry Taff of what he looks like today. I couldn't find one of him when he was younger. Dr. Barry Taff has written and interviewed extensively about the entity haunting and Doris Bither, including writing about the case in his book, Aliens Above, Ghosts Below. He and Carrie Gaynor, who I heard is still alive actually, published some of their findings from the case in scientific journals. Even more than 40 years after the initial events, Taff is hesitant to draw a conclusion about the cause of the events, although he has suggested in his writings and interviews that he suspects at least some poltergeist activity was psychic kinetic activity, possibly coming from Doris Bither herself and perhaps her teenage sons. So you're probably all wondering whatever happened to the house itself. Here is what the house looks like today, and it doesn't really look as much different as it did back in the 70s, although it was repainted a different color. It was actually a yellow color to begin with, but now, as you can see, it's been painted gray. So the Bither house is still standing in Culver City, but according to reports from people who have lived there over the years after Bither, as well as the current owners, there haven't been any further signs of a haunting or anything out of the ordinary. The house remains to this day ghost-free and is in good condition. It's impossible to say what actually causes any haunting, though. It seems that whatever haunted it left with Doris. Some researchers believe that a haunting is caused by negative energy in a home stemming from a curse or past violence on the land. Other paranormal investigators believe that those who are haunted bring it on themselves. This information gives credence to the idea that Doris and her sons had either experienced intense poltergeist activity or that she had managed to open a portal within herself to another dimension. Whatever the case, Culver City doesn't appear to be a place anyone needs to avoid. In spite of numerous witnesses to the activity and evidence gathered in connection with the case, no one has ever claimed to have solved the entity case. Instead, at most, it can be called an extremely active an often violent case of poltergeist phenomena that plagued a disturbed woman and her children back in the 1970s. And that concludes our show for tonight. Before we go, as I always do, because obviously we've been talking about the entity, and I got to make this really fast here, guys, because again, I'm sure the other show is waiting. So I'm going to just show very quickly for those of you who have not seen it, I'm going to show the trailer of the entity. So here is. It's just only about a minute and a half, so hopefully you guys enjoy. And then afterwards, I got to get off here.
Hey, wake up! Wake up, everybody! It's a gorgeous day! Gorgeous day! Come here.
20th Century Fox presents the story of Carla Moran.
Names are
The most
changed too.
extraordinary case in the history of...
Sorry. Whoops, sorry.
The most extraordinary case in the history of psychic research.
Everything broke loose. It went crazy. Everything was shaking. The bed was shaking, and the walls were shaking. And
Like an earthquake.
no, it wasn't like an earthquake. It was much stronger than any earthquake. Oh, wait a minute. I don't really understand this. You were attacked, or you weren't. It happened. I was raped.
You were raped by whom?
I don't know. There was no one there.
The enemy.
A team of experts will investigate her life. Why does he attack you, Carla? Not to anyone else. Why should go to such lengths to support this delusion? And they will find more than evidence. They will find the entity.
All right, that was quite an intense movie, definitely. So I'm looking forward to seeing it, but at the same time, I'm not, considering what's going to be shown in it. All right, so I got to get off here quickly, just to give a quick shout out, because now I can actually see the comments. Yes, thank you, Cheyenne. Thank you very much. Completely disagree that she intended this to happen. Yeah. Thank you, Josh, very much. Penny, appreciate it. I'll read this quickly for Jill. And if there is something going on, it's due to a collective idea that manifested through a high thought that can be eradicated by using positive thoughts. Okay. Jill, as always, thank you. Yeah, this was quite the presentation. You certainly chilling. Yes, Jenny, definitely a fantastic show. And use some protection prior. Okay, so I got to just as I'm about to get off, and thank you, Natalie. Thank you for tuning in. Okay, so I got to get off here, but just before I go, I want to make a quick announcement that unfortunately I'm starting to run out of presentations. So I don't want to disappoint anyone necessarily, but next, I'm actually going to be taking a brief hiatus with the Nick Files. So next Wednesday will actually be my last episode, because what I'm doing is, like with the 13th Dimension, some of these other shows on these networks, I'm actually going by season. So next Wednesday will be the end of season 1. I'm going to take a hiatus for probably about a good month or two, because obviously I need to take a well-deserved break and rest. And also I need some time to start putting together more presentations. Josh, if you want to send ideas, feel free to. I'll try and put them together. There's no guarantees, because there are some cases that I already do have already on the list. So for next week's show, and Jill, you were talking earlier about the poltergeist case with it being cursed. Well, that's actually what we're going to be talking about next Wednesday. So we will be talking about that, but also, believe it or not, guys, and most people don't seem to really know this, but Poltergeist is actually based on a true story as well. Not just the supposed urban legends that it's cursed, but it actually was based off of a real case that occurred. I'll just say this. In New York back in the late 1950s. I'll put it this way. It was called the Popping Bottle Ghost. but I don't want to say too much, obviously, because I don't want to spoil it. But that will be the final episode of season 1 of the Nick Files. Of course, obviously, I'll still be doing, even though I won't be doing the show for a while on Wednesdays. Obviously, I'll still be obviously in Don, in the show. I'll be I will still be on Tuesday nights in Don's horror discussion. Of course, I'll still also be on Supernatural Talk and the 13th Dimension on Friday. So, anyways, again, guys, I always appreciate it so much. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll be able to sleep for a week now. and then, yes, and also too, guys, right before I get started with that, I'll present the interview footage of the real case of the entity. So thank you guys all again. I will see some of you guys tomorrow night. But if you're waiting to see the presentation, I will see some of you guys next week. You guys all have a great night.